Hello world, Michael here. In this devlog, I'd like to give you an update on what I've been up to. I'm in the middle of something, so I don't have like a demo to report on and show you. I'm just gonna do a talking head update. Sorry about that, but I'm doing something that's taken longer than I originally expected. A common situation in software development. So in previous devlogs, I've shown the single server stress test where we hit a single server with thousands of avatars. And that's a good test to do. It was helpful for me to find some bugs and optimizations that I needed to do. I used that to get single server performance up to a very respectable bit. It can handle, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of messages per second. And that's what I kind of need it to. Now that that's over with, I can move on to the cluster technology and debugging that and optimizing that. In some of the comments on some social media platforms, I've talked about, the network bandwidth and scaling out and the cluster stuff. I've been clear that the cluster stress test is coming, and that's the big thing that I'm doing next. And that's what I've been working on. It's taking longer. It's just a mess of a thing. It's a complex situation. The server itself is complex. Each server, different type of server. And you put them together in a cluster and you just have all kinds of complexity. And that's, what we need to get the job done, but it just makes things harder, takes things longer. Testing a single server is pretty straightforward. Hitting up the cluster, stressing it out, getting it to break, takes a more sophisticated test, more sophisticated environment, and things just take longer. So this devlog was kind of just to say hi and let you know that that's what's going on. It's a big deal, and this little break can give me time to explain why the cluster stress test is so important. And that's the main thing that I'd like to do right now. So let's talk about the cluster technology and why it's important. So as a reminder, what we're doing here is we're doing a single shard platform, true single shard with unlimited population density. It means that our cluster, you players connect to a cluster, our cluster, and the cluster has no limits to how many players connect. There's no queues. You don't wait in line to play the game. When you're in the game, you can go anywhere you want. Cluster gives you no limit to the density. It figures out what it needs to do, and it does it behind the scenes, and you, the player, don't notice anything. That's what we're going for. You need to have a gaming experience where you don't have to think about the servers. You don't have to know anything about them. You don't deal with disconnects and crashes and whether you need to change servers or instances. We want players to just play their game. We want to suspend disbelief as much as possible so that you can just stay in the game and have fun and hang out with your people. That's what we're going for here. So let's talk about what do you need at the server level, the cluster level, in order to achieve that? It gets pretty crazy. Let's say, just to make things easy, every player in the game represents 1 kilobit of network bandwidth. And there's other issues involved, not just network, but we can talk about network because math is a little bit easy and people kind of understand that a little bit easier than the other concepts, I think. So 1 player is 1 kilobit per second talking to the server. Every player is 1 kilobit a second. So you're in an area with 10,000 other players, let's just say. And like I said, to make it easy, each one of those players is 1 kilobit a second, and you need the information from those players in order to draw them on the screen and figure out what they're doing. What does their avatar look like? Have they changed their appearance? Are they shooting something? All of the objects that are going on around it to make it all happen, the details. We're just going to put all that together and say every player is 1 kilobit a second. Everyone's sending their data to the server. The server is replicating that information out to every other player. You need your 1 kilobit a second, and you need the streams from other players. So right then and there, you might think the math is pretty straightforward. I need 10,000 kilobits a second of bandwidth coming to my machine so that I can draw everyone on the screen and find out what everyone's doing. That's good. 10,000 is a lot of players. You probably won't want that many people around you really, but your machine can handle 10,000 kilobits a second. We'd prefer that number to be smaller, but whatever. You can handle that. Let's talk about the server though. The server is getting that 1 kilobit stream for 10,000 players And the server has to give every one of those 10,000 players the 10,000 kilobit stream, right? So that means the server's aggregate bandwidth needs are 1 kilobit a second per player times 10,000 players, but each player is getting 10,000 kilobits. So you have to multiply a lot of things together. And at the end of the day, what you get is 100 gigabits. If I've done my math correctly, you've got 1 kilobit per player, 10,000 players. That means the server needs an aggregate bandwidth of 100 gigabits per second. You're generally not going to want one server to do that. And so there are ways of, distributing that network load across servers. There are techniques to do that. Well, here's where things get interesting. Okay, so that's 10,000 players and that's nice, but we want a platform that really has no limits, or that their limits are so high that we never encounter the limits. And that's kind of what we're going for here. But we don't know our player capacity ahead of time. And we want players to be able to go anywhere, do anything. And so we have these density issues where we can't necessarily pre-decide how many servers are going to be in a certain location or what they're going to do and all these things. So what that leads us, I'll probably skip a few concepts, but what we're getting at here is finally designing our cluster technology means that we don't just need 10 servers in a cluster, 100 or whatever. We need the ability to add servers and not have any diminishing return on the additional player capacity that each server we added gives us. So if our base cluster gives us 10,000 player capacity units, then when I add, let's say we have 10 servers in a cluster, 10,000 player capacity. When I add the 11th server, let's say it gives me an additional 1,000 player capacity units. When I add the 12th server, it needs to give me another 1,000. And we need that additional server capacity number per server to be the same. We don't want any diminishing return. If we have a diminishing return, that means as we add servers, it levels off. Our player capacity will eventually level off, potentially to the point where adding an additional server could reduce player capacity. So you can get into that phenomenon. If we have a diminishing return when adding a server, it means that our cluster has a population limit of some sort. Now, if that's high enough and we never hit it in reality, then fine, but it's probably not. Any kind of diminishing return is going to hit you pretty hard quickly. So we don't want any diminishing return. So finally, it's kind of saying the same thing again. We need cluster technology that lets us add an arbitrary number of server such that no server has a diminishing return, no additional server. That's hard to do, and that's what we're working on. I believe I figured out the algorithm a year ago, and that's why I self-funded the studio and did my fair share of taking the risk to get us to this point. This domain has a lot of scams in it and a lot of failed projects that were created and worked on by very honest and hardworking developers, but they just weren't able to figure it out. And that happens. It happens a lot. And it's okay to take a risk and fail. It's not okay to give up. And, I kind of thought other studios would figure it out. And after so many years, I just realized I needed to do it. So after I did the prototype that showed me that I could do it on paper, and, quick demos, back of the napkin programming kind of a thing, then, like I said, self-funded the studio and got us here. So now we've got this game that's online, public. You could play it during the free play happy hour and all that. And I haven't added the cluster technology back to it. That'll be later this week. But I'm now at the point, finally, of testing the cluster technology in such a way where I can give you the video and show some numbers. So the claim here with our cluster technology is that we can, as implied, add servers to a cluster with no diminishing return. That's going to be really difficult for me to prove to you because, who's to say that the 50th server doesn't have a diminishing return? Basically what I need to do in this testing phase is just load the thing up, and I'll probably have to artificially handicap each server so that I don't, just blow up the network and and all that, and demonstrate that the cluster, you know, can grow and that there's no diminishing return, at least in adding, you know, however many servers I end up adding, 10s, 20s, I don't know. These things can get expensive actually. And so it's just not practical to go too far with these synthetic tests. Really what we want to do is prove the theory and prove very large capacities. Should be able to do that, you know, like 10,000, 20,000, and then make a game, you know, like let's just move on with this thing and make a game and get people on and let's start having fun. Let's iterate with a live audience and not just do demos all day. So like I said, because I'm in the middle of doing this testing work, I don't have anything to show you. And I think I've talked about every topic that I wanted to. I don't really make very good outlines. My brain's in the clouds most of the time, writing code and then thinking about writing code. So with this video, I wanted to potentially introduce some more concepts that I haven't talked about in other videos, specifically the n squared issue, which is as you add players to the system, each player needs to know about the other player in their local area, you know, asterisks on that one. Every player can't know about every other player if you've got a million players out there. You only need to know about the interest set that is local to you. That is going to be very dynamic. It's going to be very context sensitive to what you're doing, why you're doing it, who else is doing the things. So it's not just necessarily spatial, you know, location, but potentially other places in the game, like gameplay, like, you know, are you doing the same quest and need to communicate even though you're far apart, whatever. So each player has their interest set that they need information on. And so when that interest set is very large, and that's kind of what we're talking about here, when it's very large, you cannot replicate that data on just a single server. You need to have fancy stuff going on with the cluster. And that's generally what we're talking about. That's generally, in my opinion, as far as I know, that's what really limits your density issues in games. If two players are on the opposite sides of the map and don't need to know anything about each other, then generally speaking, it's pretty straightforward to reason through a horizontally scalable architecture to handle that scenario. If players are very separated, then it's probably easier to figure out doing a single shard game. The real issues are when we talk about density. Players are doing things very close to each other in large numbers in some form where things get crazy. That's generally the scenario that I talk about most of the time. So if you were listening closely a minute ago, you might have thought that we're trying to give every player all the information on every other player. That's not true. I really meant to say just your local area. So I hope that's clear now. This topic is complex enough where I tend to forget everything I'm supposed to say, and you'll want to watch the comments for these videos, and there's good discussions in some of these videos all across the different platforms. And, you know, people will call me out on details that I've missed, and I appreciate that. So that's one of them. Okay, so let me pause here. I mainly wanted to just talk about the nature of the cluster technology and why we have to solve it. The big deal is being able to add that arbitrary server number dynamically without knowing ahead of time. So let me take a minute and talk about why this is really important at potentially another level, and not just technology and making another game that is fun that no one has ever experienced. There's more that's going on here. And that's the social side. If we can create a virtual environment that has no limits, no practical limits to density, and you can kind of just go anywhere, do anything, meet anyone, it means everyone will be in the same environment, and it increases, it changes everything. You no longer view the environment as an environment. It is the environment. It is where you go to meet anyone. And I think we haven't thought through this collectively. I don't hear a lot of conversations about what it would mean. There might be a few blog posts on it. People may make casual reference. You might, every now and again, you see the Ready Player One reference. That's fun. They all appear to be the same types of comments now. I don't think we have a public conversation going on that's very active about this topic. What does it look like to have a virtual environment with no limits? If we can pull this off, it'll represent the biggest revolution in online games, I believe, since online games. And it will mean that we can build experiences that we potentially don't know what the consequences are of. We don't know what the consequences of something is unless we kind of just do it. People aren't really known well for, guessing and looking around corners. It's just not something that we just do well. And so I say, we don't know what this will do. We're talking about a game, but imagine that it's not just a game, it's just a social place. And you don't always have to bring in a game mechanic to it. It can just be an online virtual environment where you meet people. So just as a base social idea, what does that mean when there are no limits and it becomes the place online when you want to have that, humanoid avatar or whatever, represent yourself and view other interactions? What does it mean when there's thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people and you can all just teleport around, fly around, whatever, in the same map? And you don't even think of it as a game map anymore. It's your shared virtual space and you completely take it for granted. And you're there. Suspension of disbelief has been achieved. You're in it and you never get disconnected. There's no crashes. There's no movement limitations because of the server technology. Like, what does that look like? That's largely the motivation of what I'm going for here, because I want to give this technology to the world and I want people to really enjoy it and have a lot of fun with it. And I think we're close to demoing that we can do it. It's all fun and games until, reality hits and you just can't handle the load. So the next devlog in this, I may talk about other topics before I launch or before I release the cluster demo, but the next devlog that has the cluster technology stress test is going to be an amazing achievement. It may look boring because it'll have limitations on the visuals because it's the kind of test that it is. But if the numbers line up and we can demonstrate adding servers to a cluster with no diminishing return, so we can have like a cluster of a large amount of users, players. If we can demonstrate that clearly, that'll be like one of the two things I owe you. I owe you proof that the technology works in terms of a demo, and I owe you a public game that works, that you can join. We have the game now. I haven't added the cluster technology to it. So if the next devlog hits and I can show this, that's a big deal. And then I'll add it to the game and then you can just play it and it's there. And then we can start really focusing on building out the game experiences that we as a studio are building on top of our platform at the same time, while we're also improving the platform so that anyone else can create their own gaming experiences. Those are the two big things we need to do, the demo and the online proof. We're very close to that, and that's very exciting. It's taken a long time to get here. I've done my part in absorbing as much of the risk in this venture as possible. I didn't ask for trust a year ago when I had the idea. I proved to myself, and then I am attempting to prove to everyone else that we have the goods. The hardest thing to do is the single shard technology, and that's what we want to demonstrate. That's all we want to demonstrate. The game can come later, even though we have a basic block builder. Google, I think, has this analogy called, I forget the official name. It's like, if your project is to get a monkey to recite Shakespeare while standing on a podium in the park, the first thing you do should not be to create the podium. The first thing you do should be to get a monkey to recite Shakespeare, because that's the hardest thing. You should do the hardest thing first. If you build your podium and spend all your money on the podium and then figure out that you can't get a monkey to recite Shakespeare in the park, then you're done. Your project has failed. I think that's a great analogy of why you should do the hardest thing first. So I've done my part in taking all the risk to teach a monkey to recite Shakespeare. And I think we're about to turn the page pretty soon on that. When that's done, then it's time to build the podium, and it's all downhill from here. So we're very much at the cusp of something very important, potentially a watershed moment. And I look forward to sharing it with you all. So much more to say. I want to close this out. I keep rambling, so let's shut it down. Giving you an update on where we're at with the cluster, stress test thing, just kind of in the middle of it. The cluster is working, I should say. Right now, I'm trying to make a more sophisticated test. So I've got the cluster working great. It's debugged. It's handling a lot of load. That's awesome. Now I'm making a sophisticated test so that I can actually hit this thing hard and be confident in the results. So that was the purpose of the video, and to kind of talk about why it's important for the cluster to be able to scale to an arbitrary number of servers. So hope this was helpful for you in just kind of mapping out the terrain. What are we doing? But more importantly, why are we doing it? Why is it important? Why not just make a game? Just make a server client game. Why are we spending all this time on the servers? Well, that's why. All right, Michael out. See you in the next one. Thanks for sticking with me so long. If you've made it to this point, you're awesome. And I look forward to giving you the cluster stress test results. I look forward to finding that out. Hopefully a few more days. We'll see. All right, Michael out.